Protests against newly confirmed Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh were held in several major cities over the weekend. Thousands demonstrated in places like Seattle, Denver, right here in New York, and Washington, D.C. Judge Kavanaugh, as you know, was confirmed after he strongly denied allegations of sexual assault. Now, this comes 1 year after New York Times investigative reporter, that's Jodi Kantor, co-wrote the very first story revealing sexual assault allegations against Harvey Weinstein. This report fueled the Me Too movement, and the New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize for its reporting. Over the weekend, Kantor co-wrote in the Times, "We have only one firm prediction. This discussion over harassment and assault has no end in sight." Jodi Kantor is also, by the way, we're happy about this, a CBS News contributor, so we always like it, Jodi, when you come to the table. Let's start with Judge Kavanaugh, because I think most people don't think of the Me Too movement as a political issue. It seemed it was right or wrong, men and women. Now it seems to have become a political issue. Has it? Or I'm asking the question, has it become a political issue?
Well, these issues are inherently political, but also there is a special quality, I think, to the political stories over time, not just recently, about sexual misconduct. Bill Clinton, Clarence Thomas, now Brett Kavanaugh, President Trump. These take on all of the partisan anger, all of our worry about the future of the country. In some ways, they are the most important stories because they're about the presidency and the Supreme Court, but they're also the hardest because they're about so much more than just the sexual misconduct.
Partisan lines, though.
Well, that's the frustratingly predictable thing. What felt special in many ways about the Me Too movement in the last year, about the Weinstein story, the O'Reilly story, et cetera, is that they did not split along partisan lines. The message was, this is a problem everywhere, no matter who you are, no matter what you believe politically, this is all something we need to confront together as a society. Now it feels a little bit with Kavanaugh like that togetherness is splitting and falling apart.
Well, it's an issue that requires nuance and careful understanding, and politics, when it is most successful, squeezes out all nuance, makes things blunt, and uses them as a hammer. I wanted to get your sense, Jodi, of an evolution that I saw that I thought was interesting. And when John Cornyn, the Texas senator, came out of hearing Dr. Ford's testimony, he said, well, there were gaps in the testimony, but then he quickly said, but that's because when you have trauma, there are gaps. He seemed to be very sensitive to that idea. Then President Trump, a week later, is on the stump in a rally making light of the gaps. The reason this is important, of course, is for sexual assault survivors or people who've been through it. The gaps mean it means you're not listening, you're not believing them if you say, well, you have gaps in your story.
Absolutely. If you look at Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony, for a lot of people, the power was that she stood up before the country and she said, this thing happened so many years ago, but it still matters. And no, I don't have perfect evidence and a ton of documentation. And no, I can't tell you everything about that night, but I am clear on what happened and I'm going to tell you. Other people responded the opposite way and said, what do you mean you have no evidence? What do you mean you have no documentation? He's being falsely accused.
But Jodi, you had people in the Senate, and a lot of people are talking about Susan Collins on this, where they said, well, something happened to her, but it wasn't Brett Kavanaugh, where she said, I'm 100% certain. What message does it send to survivors if even when you speak up and you're telling your truth and you say you're 100% because they knew each other and you're not to be believed?
What Senator Collins said, and President Trump said something very similar, it's not even logically consistent because Senator Collins on Saturday said there wasn't enough evidence for me to vote against him, but then she sort of raising a theory that Dr. Ford is misremembering this and that it was really somebody else. What evidence does Senator Collins have for that theory that she just floated on television?
You know, Jodi, you and Megan wrote about this. Perhaps it's time to start thinking of this less as a news story than as a permanent news element of our lives. That's probably the way we're going. Thank you very much for being here.